Welcome to a One America News special. I'm Eric Stakelbeck. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to take you inside an organization that many say poses the greatest threat to America's national security today. That organization is ISIS, also known as the Islamic State. Over the past few months, this terrorist army has conquered large areas of Syria and Iraq in the very heart of the Middle East. In doing so, they've carried out mass beheadings, rapes, torture, even crucifixions, all while declaring a jihad against anyone who does not share their dark vision. That includes the ancient Christian communities of the Middle East who've suffered wholesale slaughters at the hands of the brutal Islamic State. Well-armed and well-funded, ISIS uses social media savvy to broadcast each new atrocity to the world, gaining scores of new recruits in the process. And if Americans thought they could avoid the ISIS onslaught, those thoughts were put to rest with the recent videotaped beheading of journalist James Foley. The New Hampshire native was murdered by an ISIS jihadist. Authorities believe the suspect is a former British rapper who left a comfortable life in London behind to travel to Syria. Intelligence officials say thousands more like him have left places like France, Britain, Denmark, and the United States to fight alongside ISIS. The fear is that one day these Western passport holders will return home, battle-tested, to carry out attacks on U.S. and European soil. Here we'll speak to some of America's leading national security experts and examine the threat ISIS poses to America and the world and what we can do to stop it. But first, let's take a look at how we got here and how ISIS became the most notorious terrorist organization in the world. Before ISIS, there was al-Qaeda in Iraq. After coalition forces overthrew Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein in 2003, various insurgent groups sprang up and attacked U.S. troops. The most vicious and lethal of those groups was al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI. AQI pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden and quickly became known for its brutality, including the beheading of an American contractor. The leader of AQI, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, was killed in a U.S. airstrike in 2006. By adding additional American forces and working closely with Sunni tribes, U.S. troops soon went on to rout AQI in what became known as the Surge. As a result, some level of stability had returned to Iraq by the time President Obama took office. But the president made clear that he wanted to end the American presence in Iraq as soon as possible, and he did so in late 2011. The White House website even boasted that the president had ended the war in Iraq.
We're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq with a representative government that was elected by its people. We're building a new partnership between our nations. And we are ending a war, not with a final battle, but with a final march toward home.
Yet while al-Qaeda in Iraq had largely been defeated, it was not dead. By 2011, its forces had moved across the border into Syria, joining the civil war against the regime of Bashar al-Assad. At the same time, it began to rebuild in Iraq. Not long after U.S. troops departed, AQI began a wave of car bombings in Iraq and was back on the march again, now calling itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS for short. By early 2014, ISIS controlled parts of eastern Syria and had reconquered a chunk of Anbar province in western Iraq, including the city of Fallujah, where U.S. forces had fought bloody battles to defeat al-Qaeda a decade earlier. In the meantime, al-Qaeda's leadership in Pakistan disowned ISIS, saying it was too extreme, even for al-Qaeda. Yet in an interview with the New Yorker magazine, President Obama compared ISIS to amateurs, saying if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant. By June 2014, this so-called JV team had conquered Iraq's second largest city, Mosul, seized oil fields, and become the richest terrorist organization in the world. It drove south towards Baghdad, seizing advanced U.S. military hardware and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. ISIS now controlled an area of territory stretching across Iraq and Syria that was larger than several American states. On June 30th, its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, declared this area an Islamic state or caliphate and demanded the allegiance of Muslims throughout the world. He also threatened to strike America. Pressure grew on President Obama to act.
We will not be sending U.S. troops back into combat in Iraq, but I have asked my national security team to prepare a range of other options that could help support Iraq security forces.
Soon, ISIS began to threaten the Kurdish areas of northern Iraq and forced hundreds of thousands of Iraqi Christians to flee their homes. When ISIS trapped thousands of Iraq's minority Yazidi sect on a mountain, promising mass slaughter, the Obama administration intervened. U.S. airstrikes pushed ISIS back from the Kurdish areas, freed the strategic Mosul Dam from ISIS control, and allowed the Yazidis to escape. Yet, as the beheading of James Foley showed, ISIS very much continues its carnage and has its sights set on the United States.
أقول لأمريكا إن الخلافة الإسلامية قامت وبإذن الله لن تتوقف. يا جبناء إن كنتم رجال فنحن على الأرض فلا تأتون بالطائرات من دون طيار فأتوا بجنودكم الذين مرغنا أنوفهم في العراق وبإذن الله سوف نمرق أنوفهم بكل مكان وإن شاء الله بالبيت الأبيض سوف نرفع على راية لا إله إلا الله.
U.S. officials say at least 100 American citizens have traveled to Syria, and many have linked up with ISIS. In all, it's estimated that at least 3,000 Western Muslims have joined ISIS, including some women. We spoke to Ryan Morrow, a national security analyst with the Clarion Project, about the danger these Western recruits pose.
One of the remarkable things about the social media content of ISIS is the sheer quality. It surpasses what Al-Qaeda has done in the past, the granddaddy of the jihadist organizations, and they put out a lot of content in English. They want to recruit Westerners, especially Americans. What we're seeing is a new strategy based on sarcasm, bravado, and it's almost always in English media. They understand that recruiting a single American is worth recruiting dozens of Arabs. If you recruit an American and that American carries out an attack, regardless of how successful it is, that's now news. That's a way of sending a message to the United States that we are inside of your country.
And these Western passport holders, when they return from Syria or Iraq to Britain, to France, to Denmark, all bets are off then, right?
Right. The European intelligence officials are openly saying that they know that many people that have already gone and fought in Syria and Iraq and gotten that battle experience have come back and are being monitored. An estimated 500 people from the United Kingdom have already gone to Syria and Iraq to link up with ISIS. One of the main barriers that terrorists face is that when they cross borders, that's very often how we catch them. It's through immigration fraud. But here they are with legitimate European Union visas, allowing them to travel the continent. And so this is a huge problem, not just for Europe, but also for the United States.
If undetected, those same ISIS terrorists can also travel within the United States. We spoke to Rudy Atala, the Pentagon's former director for counterterrorism in Africa, on why Americans should care about the rise of ISIS. A lot of people here in America say, look, Iraq, Syria, that's thousands and thousands of miles away. It won't touch us here. It won't affect us here. Are they wrong?
I think they're very wrong for many reasons. Reason number one is there are Americans out there that are fighting with ISIS. There are Europeans that are also fighting with ISIS. These are the individuals that have the reach to come back if left unchecked to the homeland, to spread that ideological craziness into our youth and then get people to embrace that type of ideology. Where we start to see the lone wolves act like the Boston bombing. It also has a detrimental effect on U.S. businesses overseas, and the economic interest is vast. I mean, what we do is we see an impact in the oil and gas industry in the Middle East. We see a lot of investments being affected, and that's going to affect Americans over here.
Coming up, what does ISIS want? What is the caliphate? And what does it mean for non-Muslims and for America?